Hi everyone, it's Dan. Today I'm going to review the book The Martian by Andy Weir. Now this is a very popular book and in a movie, and it was recommended to me from my brother. I wasn't actually going to read this book because when I first picked it up in the store and I looked at it because I was curious about what all the fuss was, it's first-person narrative. I hate first-person narrative, just a personal preference of mine, and I really hate it when it's active first-person. In other words, you see at the same time the action that the protagonist or the character sees. So, Dan looks to his left and sees a duck. I hate that narrative style, just me personally. So there was no way I was going to read this on my own, but my brother recommended it, so I said, why not? Now, I think everyone knows the basic plot to the story. It's Robinson Crusoe on Mars with a modern-day twist. So I really don't think I want to talk too much about the plot of the book. Now, but I will say that the enemy in this story is nature and also the fallibility of human invention. And then that goes versus the protagonist, Mark Watney, and his ingenuity and tenacity, which was an interesting twist as well. Because you ever watched like Robinson Crusoe on Mars, that old 1950s movie? Everything just kind of appeared out of the ground, so there's no oxygen. Oh my goodness, look, this rock gives off oxygen. That wasn't the case in this book. It's all technically based. How would you solve a problem? And that kept it pretty interesting and kind of unique in the sense of being stuck on Mars. Now, to prepare for this video, I found a lot of talks by Andy Weir on YouTube, and that also influenced my reading of this book, because I did it before I read the book. And what I found is that I liked the germination story of this novel. I liked Andy Weir's personality as he's talking about it. And so when initially I looked at it and I was like, I don't want to read this book, it's first person. My brother recommended it, and then I kind of liked the author and I liked the germination story behind it. Kind of a whirlwind pickup, one of those rare things that happens in the publishing world. And that made me go into reading it a little bit happier. And made me enjoy the book a little bit more. But I do recommend you go and you find Andy Weir on YouTube or someplace else and you listen to the story behind the book, because it's really a fascinating story. So I really don't want to talk too much about the plot, because once you do, you give away the secrets. But I will talk a lot about the structure of this novel, both the narrative structure, the plot structure, and then I want to talk a little bit about the physical structure of how it's written in the book. So let's start off talking about the narrative style. Now, you heard me say I don't like first-person narrative, and that's true. But what surprised me is that after chapter 6, the author went from the first-person narrative to the traditional third-person narrative from different points of view. So all of a sudden I leave the main protagonist, and I'm starting to see a narrative style that I really enjoy, and then he juxtaposes this all throughout the course of the novel. And that also gave me a different tempo and a different view of what was going on, which I also liked. It gave that author an opportunity to explore things and explain things in a way that he couldn't have done if he's just stayed in the first person point of view. So I liked that part of the book too, because then it's appealing directly to me and my preferred narrative style. The other thing that I'd like to talk about is that within that context, I'd like to talk a little bit about the structure of actually writing the story in the book. So again, we start with a first-person narrative up to chapter 6, and then what you end up with, because I thought it would be one simple through line, we're going to follow that character all the way through the story, but it turned out that it was what I called a convergence, or converging through lines. So all of a sudden we had multiple characters in depth, and these characters all had an influence on the story, and so we're following them as they go through the storylines too, and then they all come together at the end. Now, another strange thing about using the convergence technique, which I talk about in a video, and I'll stick a link up here for you, is that in most convergent stories where you have multiple characters, they all come together at the climax of the story, and then the story ends. These people didn't actually physically come together. They came together in the sense of the task being accomplished, but there was no physicality of it except in one particular instance. So that was also very interesting for me. Again, I write books, so that was an interesting structure. So now I've got a couple of things going for me as far as my liking of this book. I've got a very interesting narrative style, which changes, and then I've got a very interesting convergent through line style, which is kind of unique also. So I really like that aspect of the book on the technical aspects of the book. Also, this book has a classical thriller plot design. So you remember I did put some videos up about how a plot is designed. You have exposition, and then you have the inciting event, and then in a continued problems that the protagonist has to solve, and then you get to the big one, the climax, and there's exposition at the end, and the story ends. So you get exposition, inciting event, building tension, and the end. Well, in a classical thriller, there's no exposition in the beginning, or very, very little. And in this one, there's actually, in the Martian, there's no exposition in the beginning. It's weaved in. You start off right at building tension. So the problems start to increase right off the bat. And that pretty much continues to chapter 6 when you start getting the third person thing, and then you start seeing exposition with the third person. And so you jump into the fire right off the bat, and that kind of holds you. And that continues all the way through the end of the book. And at the very end of the book, where you expect exposition to wrap up the story, no, it just ends. So again, that's very much a thriller's design for plot. So I liked that it was a thriller in the plot design. I liked the fact that the narrative changed from first person to third person to multiple third persons, which allowed the author to write about things that the protagonist could not possibly know about, which helped build tension. And then I also like the strange physical design of it in the story, or in the book, which is the single through line up to chapter 6, then an explosion of little stars in third person, and this convergence of their through lines to the climax of the book, but then not even physically getting together for most of those through lines and having the story end. So on a very technical basis for me, I found it very enjoyable because he was doing very strange and odd and kind of fun things from an author's point of view. So I really enjoyed that. But, so I guess that leads me to, did I like the book? Yeah, I liked the book. I thought it was fun. I liked the backstory that the author gave of it. I liked the way it was designed and written, and it was a lot of fun. Now, I did have a little bit, I got tired of the little bitty problems about 2/3 of the way through the book, and I started skimming. I found myself skimming the story. I guess that's a balancing. How many little problems do you have before you move to the next major one? And for me, he lost me for a little bit, the author did. But as soon as he started traveling across the face of Mars, he got my attention again, and that carried me all the way through to the end of the book. So you might have that problem too. I liked the sense of humor that the protagonist had, and everybody actually, all the characters had a particular type of sense of humor. I thought that was nice. And, you know, I have looked at some other video reviews of the book, and some of them don't like the cursing that's in it, but I didn't find it to be that bad. The cursing was non-personal, so just explicatives, you know, like you hit your hand with a hammer and you go, oh, fill in the blank. So it didn't bother me at all, and so I do recommend it to anybody, really about the age of 10 or older, my personal reference or belief. But if you're a parent and you're thinking, I don't want them to see any cursing, then wait until they're in their mid to late teens before you let your kids read this book. But it is an exciting book, and it does fill your mind with an appreciation for technology and man's tenacity, and it's really worth the read. So I'd hate to keep it out of the hands of a kid who's interested in science or just trying to get them interested in reading simply because there's some cursing in it. It's not that bad. So I do recommend it. It's a fun read. Again, go back and look up Andy Weir and get a good look at one of his talks about how the book materialized. I think you'll enjoy that a lot. And with all that said, I guess that's it. So I'll see you all next time.